Great. Hello, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm so glad you chose to come to this talk. Good morning. I'm Sarah Kate Wilder, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. You are in the personal growth track. I hope you came with some ideas to self-reflect this morning and think about how you'd like to grow using narrative therapy. I'll tell you a little more about it, of course. All right, just to tell you a little bit more about myself. So, as I said, I'm a narrative therapist, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and narrative therapy is so cool. It's all about how we make meaning, how we story our lives. And so this is like a narrative therapy dream to come to a conference where you're all about story for personal growth. So it's pretty perfect. I'm also a trust-based relational intervention practitioner. I specialize in working in trauma in children and families, but I also work in a variety of other issues and a variety of other people in counseling, so I work in private practice. I did go to the University of Florida for my bachelor's and my graduate education specialist degrees, so I've been around Gainesville for a hot minute, and Velvet Rut really resonated with me. To tell you a little more about myself, since we're talking about stories today, I'm married to Gannon, and this is our blue pit Lily. She's like always snuggled up right next to us, and she was like, "Please don't make me move." I'm also a yoga and Pilates instructor. I've been doing that for like 7 or 8 years or so, and I really take a lot from mindfulness perspectives with narrative therapy. Both are very present-centered, present-oriented, so how the past affects the present. And mindfulness essentially is awareness of the present moment intentionally, being intentionally aware of the present moment. So we'll use a little bit of that today. And then just to share a fun fact with you, because I can, I'm obsessed with ocean life in Wales and got to see them in the wild for the first time. So I had to share that with you just in case there's any other ocean lovers or like David Attenborough documentary enthusiasts out there. Come talk to me afterwards. I'd love to geek out with you. So to orient us and use a little mindfulness now, we'll do a little exercise for a few minutes. And throughout my talk today, I've got a few activities, some mindfulness components. I invite you to do what feels right for you. So if that's observing, then please do that. If that's participating, do that. Whatever feels like is best for you. Also, if you need to get up, use the bathroom, or if you're planning on talk hopping, do your thing. So let's start with a little activity to orient to the space we're in. So I want you to feel the chair beneath you, get comfy. Maybe if you're sitting up tight, maybe lean back. These chairs are really nice. Maybe bring a soft gaze down to a point in front of you, or if it feels safe to close your eyes, do that. And we're going to bring our awareness into our senses. Starting with the ears, maybe noticing any sounds, maybe the sound of my voice, maybe the machines humming, air conditioning. Maybe the sound of your breath, perhaps breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth. Now bringing your awareness into the nose. If there's any smells lingering, noticing, just being aware, practicing non-judgment. We're just noticing, not adding any pros or cons to it, just being aware of it. Moving your awareness into the mouth. Maybe noticing any lingering tastes from this morning. Bringing your awareness into the skin and the sensations on your skin. So becoming aware of the texture of maybe the clothing on your body or the chair beneath you, wherever your hands are resting. Just being aware. And last, we'll start to, if your eyes are closed, maybe breaking them open, gently, slowly, becoming aware of any sights, starting to notice the colors, maybe just say them in your head as you look around, maybe starting to look around the room, orienting to the space, noticing a lot of technology, maybe smiling at the person next to you. All right, you're here. Glad you're here. All right, maybe shaking it out a little bit. That got you a little sleepy this morning. Shaking out the ribs. Okay, so to give you a second just to say hey to the person next to you as I hope to continue this frame of networking, of connecting throughout this conference. I'm just going to give us a minute or so and say hey to the person next to you. If you'd like to use these questions, feel free to. You don't have to, but perhaps share your name. Get to know them for a moment. So I'm going to dive into this talk on narrative therapy, how you can use it for personal growth. So I use it as a framework for when I'm doing counseling, but it's also a philosophy. It's something that I think impacts all areas of my life, and I'll share some examples for my personal life as well of how to keep a narrative framework. So it is a type of, like I said, a framework for counseling, but that can be used for anyone. It is a way of using stories to identify kind of how you're making meaning, how you're thinking about who you are. We'll talk a lot about that. I think this quote sums it up really nicely, that we can't always control the stories that we're given, the stories that we're told from other people. We can't control experiences necessarily, but we can control the stories that we're telling ourselves, how we're making meaning. And we can, with a lot of care and intentionality, rework or rewrite some of those storylines of identity. So as a kind of framework for you, what narrative therapy seeks to do is, with a graph, right, you can think of your life experiences as different points on a graph, right? All of these different plot points are stories from your life. And what we do, because we're meaning-making machines as humans, and we like to connect the dots, right, is we connect this experience to that experience to this to that, right, and then we create a theme or something that we tie into our identity. But sometimes those themes or the stories that we're told from other people don't line up with the full scope of our experiences. You see this one line here neglects all of these other points that we could, experiences that we can make meaning of about who we are. So what we do is we seek to kind of broaden the story, incorporate stories that feel more true given your whole scope of your experience. That's why it's really personal, is because you're the one that understands your full story, your full context. Nobody else has your life, right? And so you know all the things that brought you to this point. So let's keep thinking about this with an example. You might have seen this in the description for the talk. Imagine for a moment that you're walking down the street and a stranger is walking towards you at a fast pace while staring down at their phone. You do your best to avoid them, but they still bump into you hard. You stand there for a moment, reeling from the throbbing in your shoulder and arm. They don't stop to acknowledge you, they just keep walking. So in that moment, what do you think? And this is the time where you can shout out what you might think. So give me some ideas.
Damn.
Yeah. Right? Come on now, right? Any other thoughts?
Sure.
Uh-huh.
I wonder where you're running to.
Yeah. Maybe some curiosity, but right.
If you've had a background of neglect, you'd say it would reinforce the fact that you feel like you're invisible.
That is a great point, right? Because given a whole scope of experiences can create certain reactions in us, certain things, assumptions we make, right? And I had that same feeling of thinking about this example of this rude, right? Like, no. But what narrative therapy do when we take that lens is say, you know what? We don't know the full story. Most of our experience fall in a gray area. And we don't know if that person just found out something and why they were looking at their phone and they had to go up to the hospital. We don't know what is happening in their day and their scope. We don't know if they're a jerk, right? We just don't know. And that's the reality, is a lot of times we just won't know the full picture. I'm certainly not going to run down and flag that person down and be like, tell me all about your life so I can assess whether you really are a jerk or not, right? No, probably not going to do that. But what I can control is, what do I take from that situation? So if I can change with awareness and intentionality, if I can take a moment to say, you know what, that probably wasn't personal. From that point on, the perspective I'm going into the rest of my day with probably is going to be a lot less offended, a lot less frustrated, angsty. So for me, again, it's very personal. It's about what you need to do for yourself. For me, that would be a better lens to go into the rest of my day with. So that's what it's about. It's about changing the meaning, changing how we're viewing things, and honoring the whole context, as well as honoring that there's a lot we don't know, right? So with the narrative frame, human problems are viewed as arising from or being maintained by oppressive stories which dominate the person's life. You brought up a great example of that, right, with neglect, and how that's an oppressive, chronic experience, right, that can send some oppressive stories to that person that can dominate their life, right? So it all starts with reflection and awareness. I hope what you get out of this talk today is to be more curious, more reflective. I hope you finish feeling like you have a lot more questions than you have answers, and that you are maybe inspired to just question the stories you're telling yourself. And it's a process. I'm certainly on the journey with you. It's quite a process. With reflection and awareness, we create space for intentionality, where we can, like in that example, I can decide, okay, do I want to stick with, wow, that person is the worst? Or do I want to stick with, you know what, probably wasn't personal, and I don't know what was going on in their day. So you can choose, and maybe you do choose that day, oh, I'm going with the worst. That's the kind of day I've had, right? But creating space to choose and to make meaning for yourself, that's where the power lies, right? If we can intentionally tell ourselves true stories about ourselves, then we can start living those stories. So we're going to focus on 3 areas. Narrative therapy is a very big field, but we're going to focus on 3 things today that I hope, again, you can use for your personal growth and how you story your life, how you identify the stories that shape who you are. So I'll have Brandon send out the PowerPoints, by the way, so that way you don't feel, so much pressure to write everything down. But this is the cheat sheet for basically my whole talk. So we've got the language we use to story our life, the situation we occupy in our social structures, in particular the power relations in these structures, and the meaning we give to our experiences, that is, the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. So let's start with that first one, the language we use to story our life. I found a great example of this. There's a famous study, you might be familiar with it, by Loftus and Palmer, and they showed how language can actually, the language that's used in asking questions can actually affect eyewitness testimony. So what Loftus did is she asked half the witnesses, first she showed participants scenes from an auto accident where two cars collided. Then she asked half the witnesses, how fast was the car going when it hit the other car? And then she asked the other half, I see nods, familiar with it. She asked the other half of people, how fast was the car going when it smashed into the other car? The people that were asked the smash question gave higher estimates of the speed of the vehicle compared to those who were asked the hit question. And the people who were asked the smash question also inserted a false memory of broken glass into the accident scene that actually wasn't there at all. So just in that one study showing how the actual language, the words that were used in asking a question affected how people remembered this scene they saw, despite all being shown the same scene. So this brings to a really key point in narrative therapy, and that's that the person is not the problem is the problem. This is really goes into language. I'd be curious how this looks in other languages as well. We'll talk about, especially with English, how we often put blame on the person, and I'll give some examples. So a first example that is more from my counseling experiences is I get to work with kids and families. I love it. Like I said, I work a lot with trauma and childhood experiences. And so I'll have parents that come in to see me that share a lot of behaviors with me. This kid is having temper tantrums, crying outbursts, bedwetting, all these issues. And often it's, okay, this kid is being bad, or this is a bad kid, right? That's the tone of the conversation. So once we can reframe it to a trauma lens, we take it away from being this is a bad kid to trauma is really affecting this child's life. So the way trauma works is that it affects the brain development so that the fear parts of the brain are the ones running the show. So those behaviors I just mentioned, do they sound like fight, flight, or freeze? Fight, temper tantrums. Freeze, right? Sometimes dissociating, sometimes shutting down, ignoring parents, right? So the trauma affects them in such a way that it can create these behaviors, but really it's the trauma that's the problem, not the child. So another more personal example of this, I was thinking about this in my own life, and I don't know how many of y'all have partners, roommates, other people, anyone sharing a home with another human being? Yeah. Okay, great. So I was thinking about this with Gannon and I and our delegation of chores, and how we had this ongoing problem where I just kept noticing that the dishes weren't getting done. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's Gannon's job. So some of the meanings I was creating in my head is, he is being negligent around the house. When I was feeling especially reactive, oh, he doesn't care that much about me, otherwise he would do the dishes, right? And so all of these meanings that when I just see this pile of dishes in the sink, I'm creating all this meaning. And creating Gannon is the problem, right? So Gannon's the problem, and gosh, if he would change, then the dishes would get done. So if you can imagine going into a conversation with your partner from that lens, how good of a conversation is that going to be? right? Like probably not very productive. So we have these conversation loops where just like nothing got solved, and by the end of it, it's just like, all right, once we finally were able to identify what the problem actually was, for us in that situation, it was communication. So I had this idea of how we delegated things around the house, and he had this other idea. And once we identified that we were missing each other, we're better able to address that problem, and it became, Gannon is not the problem, communication is the problem. Now, you might have that same exact experience, but communication isn't the thing. It might be busyness. It might be that there's just a lot going on in the house at that time, right? It could be a lot of different things. But for us, I was able to line up kind of with this graph, right? Look at our larger context of, is Gannon inconsiderate of me? No. Like, our larger context of our relationship is a partnership. So those stories I was telling myself of like, I guess he doesn't care about me, right? Those don't line up with our broader context. So in that, it was like, okay, now we can switch to a more productive conversation. But that doesn't mean now we never have a dish problem, right? That doesn't mean we never miss each other communication-wise. But it puts us on a path where we're headed toward a more productive conversation and a path that we want to be on versus staying stuck in just these stories that are keeping us from really connecting to each other. Is that making sense? Okay. So that's some of the ideas with the language that we use. So I'm going to have you take a few moments to reflect for yourself. And this is something, again, your choice if you would like to participate in activities. Thank you so much for your presence, no matter what you decide to do. For this, I've got some colored pencils, pens, paper. If you need any supplies, just wave at me, I'll pass it to you. But I want you to think of a problem in your life. We're going to use this throughout the rest of the talk. And on a scale from 0 to 10, with 0 being not a problem at all, 1 being like your coffee got cold this morning before you finished drinking it, and 10 being trauma, big T, little t trauma, I want you to think of, in your life, a problem that you would rate a 3, 4, or 5. So something that's affecting you presently that is enough of a problem that we can take and analyze it a little bit. All right, so think about that. Once you've figured out what that is, I want you to write the name of the problem on your page. So write down, actually name that problem like how I did. I called it communication or missing each other. And then draw a picture of that problem as a metaphor in your life. This could be, and I'll put up some examples of changing the language. This is again, I'll send you these PowerPoints, but these are some good ways of naming problems, like Lucy's a depressed person, changing to Lucy's been in a fog of depression. So you could use that one if Lucy were with us, she could draw a picture of a fog, right? So think of something, I'll give you a few minutes.
Does it need to be that person?
So, however, so since the person is not a problem, the problem is a problem. Yeah, so name the problem. Yeah. Any other questions? Does anyone need any writing?
Doesn't have to be a problem related to someone else?
No, does not have to be an interpersonal problem. There doesn't have to be anyone else involved in it. So like, with the kid example of acting out behaviors, the trouble would be the problem, right? And the kid is acting out doesn't mean it was with a specific person.
So picture of the problem and what it would look like if it's solved.
You don't have to go that far quite yet, although I like where your head's at. But name the problem and then just drawing a picture of it as a metaphor. again, these are not going to be collected, shared. This is just for you. Anyone need those examples still? So it looks like you've got the wheels turning, that you've thought of something in your life you can be thinking about with some of these other areas. We'll move on to the next area. So the next piece of how we look at storying our lives is the actual situation we occupy in our social structures, in particular the power relations in these structures. So as you've seen so far, narrative therapy is very context specific, very rooted in whatever the context is. Like I like how even in these examples, you can see when you put the problem in context, these sentences are a lot longer, a lot richer, right? A lot more information versus putting the blame on a person is pretty simplified, and that's not often how our problems are. So putting the situations, the experiences we have in our lives and our social structures is really important, and that's going to be very specific, of course, to the context that you're in. So this relates to the positions of power and privilege versus oppression or being underserved, the lack of power, right? And so we can look at this in the context of race, religion, socioeconomic status, gender, sexuality, ability, right? And all of these areas we want to be mindful of the stories coming from whatever culture you're in, the dominant storyline. So oftentimes the narrative of the dominant group silences the narratives of the marginalized groups. So narrative therapy seeks to create a space for marginalized stories so that everybody's story can be heard and told, not just the stories of the dominant group. That's why, of course, this is so specific to whatever context you're in. This talks a quote that kind of summarizes that piece up really nicely with how the aim is to look for marginalized stories. So essentially this honors that we all have different life experiences based on all of those different factors I just brought up before. I was thinking about one example that we can relate to and kind of pick apart the different positions that a person's in from that example. So thought of in my life the experience of getting a speeding ticket. So I can take apart that experience and see how the different areas of privilege or lack thereof affected that, just that moment of getting a speeding ticket. So I actually got pulled over twice before I ever got a speeding ticket. So I wonder if being young, or maybe in that situation, my gender of being female might have been privileges, right? And that I was let off the first 2 times. And then the third time I got pulled over, this makes me sound really wild, but you're safe with me on the road, don't worry. But the third time I got pulled over, my experience of that was that the cop came to the car. He was a white gentleman, and I have family members who are in law enforcement. I'm a white person, so my experience in that moment was not one of fear. I was not worried for my life, like perhaps a person of color or somebody who's historically and present day been oppressed by police officers, right? So I felt comfortable in that situation. The officer was very professional. I got the ticket. So it was a $150 ticket. So we brought up age, race, gender, So socioeconomic status. So in that moment, I went home and I paid the ticket for several reasons. One, I had the ability to pay the ticket. I had savings put away for emergencies. I had financial education to know how to do that. So again, these are privileges that are impacting my story and that experience, right? I had a college degree, which allowed me to get a job, which allowed me to have the means to pay that ticket. The reason I had a college degree is because I have some amazing parents, but also parents who had some privilege themselves and had the money to help me financially, and out of their generosity as well, helped me get college funding and get it through college. And so that's how I got the degree, got the job, got the money. How did I know to pay off the ticket? I had some education around that experience to know that it's better, instead of having worse consequences in the future, to just go ahead and pay it, right? And so all of these different positions I held in just that like 10, 15 minutes of getting pulled over and getting a speeding ticket affected that experience. And how different would that experience have been if maybe some of those identities were different for me? So especially like what we just brought up with that socioeconomic status, I didn't have to worry about paying a $150 ticket that I wasn't going to be able to eat the rest of the week, right? And so looking at the larger social context is so important, because that also is going to give us information about the stories that we're telling ourselves. So I'm going to read a couple. I had some just lovely friends who allowed me to share some of their stories as well, so you can get some more story in this talk of experiences that they have that really show this idea that the social positions we're in can even shape the story we tell ourselves, which can impact your identity. So my friend Abby wrote this one. She said, well, in 6th grade, our class had a substitute that decided to make me the blunt of a classroom joke. And 6th grade, right? She's a child substitute teacher. That's a power position right there. He often singled me out and would not allow me to speak without making a blonde joke, implying I knew nothing. With no true ill intention, he put the notion inside my head that I was nothing but a dumb blonde. Without knowing, I let his words have power over my identity. From that point on, I saw myself as the stereotypical blonde. All looks, no brain. Throughout the rest of middle school and high school, I relied on others to do the work for me and did not apply myself in anything other than my outward appearance and popularity status. The one senior paper I put forth effort in, my teacher accused me of cheating. I did not truly realize I was more than looks until my freshman year of college. Thanks to not knowing many people and Turnitin.com, I was forced to apply myself. Our first peer edit didn't have my stomach in a turn until I was paired with the smartest student in the classroom. Even though I still thought I didn't have much in between my ears, I'm still competitive and prideful. Anxiously awaiting his feedback, I was almost as shocked as he was once he finished reading her paper. He began complimenting and pointing out my thoughts and wordplay. As class dismissed, he shared my paper with the professor. I stood there in disbelief as they analyzed my written thoughts and asked me to elaborate. I had no idea that I could stimulate conversation on that level. It was the first moment that I was complimented for my thoughts and not my looks. That hour gave me the confidence to question what I'd been telling myself since 6th grade, to challenge and break a mold that I let a 60-year-old man with bad jokes place on me. It gives me chills, and on a personal level, she's a dear friend. I'm like, oh, so sad to think that was the story she told herself for so long. But also, what a powerful example of how a power position, right, in her life, of an authority figure telling that about herself, made it so easy for her to adopt that story. And until she had a moment to break out of that mold, that was the story she lived, and thankfully not anymore. So this is from my friend Jarrell gave me this story, and I asked him how he wanted me to introduce himself to you all, and he was like, just tell him my best features. It's like, which is everything. So I'm just gonna read his story. He says, what comes to your mind when you hear the phrase baby daddy? Irresponsible? Unreliable? Some guy who got a woman pregnant and then disappeared? Unfortunately, the way we view people that live certain experiences is largely determined by media, peer interactions, social expectations, and what's taught to us. Right? There's all that context. The sum of those influences taught me baby daddy equals those above descriptions, what I just said. And if I'm being honest, that's what I believed. In 2010, I became a baby daddy. I and the woman I was dating had broken up, and shortly after that breakup, we found out she was pregnant. Navigating the many influences of this label was extremely challenging. Socially, I felt as though one moment no one expects anything from you, and the next moment everyone expects everything from you. I was hyper aware of the number of times media would show a woman with a child without a father being present. These things weren't explicitly spoken, but I believe it definitely communicates baby daddy equals lesser. For years, this label made me feel powerless and hopeless. I was powerless to influence the thoughts of people who said baby daddy equals lesser. I felt hopeless that the stigma attached to this label would be long-lasting. I didn't feel safe to simply enjoy a relationship with my daughter, so I had to make sure people saw me being a great dad. I was mistrusting of anyone outside my circle because I thought they were just waiting for me to slightly resemble a baby daddy. There didn't seem to be any room for learning how to be a great dad. I was just expected to be one. Yeah. Right, really powerful. Especially in tying in, he says in that nobody explicitly said those things to him, but they're all experiences that are true, right? Without the explicit words being said. So now I'm going to give you a few moments to incorporate into your drawing the outside voices. The voices that impact whatever problem it is that you wrote down, or say something about who you are in that problem. These can be positive things. They can also be negative things. But right alongside or somewhere on your paper, some of those voices or storylines. And they don't have to be, like with Jarrell's story, a specific person telling you that, but just a story from maybe a dominant culture. We'll go ahead on to our last section, so start wrapping up just the thought you're on. So the last area that we're going to look at is the actual meaning we give to our experience, the story we tell ourselves about ourselves. We've been doing this a lot already in identifying who are the stories that are coming from other people, other social constructs, what is the language we're using to define our story or a problem in our life. And so in this, finding what is the actual story that we're telling ourselves? How are we connecting this to our identity, to who we are? And with that idea comes a really important belief of narrative therapy, and that's that we have the freedom to choose the story we're telling ourselves. We may not be able to change anything going on outside of us, but we can choose what we're going to take and believe about ourselves from those experiences. So we can choose to have stories about ourselves that bring hope, connection, that feel empowered, or we can choose stories that keep us stuck, keep us maybe feeling hopeless or resentful. And with that awareness is where that choice comes in, right? And it's a process. And I'll go back to that a lot with narrative therapy. It's a process. The actual meaning we get to, like even in the story you're identifying right now, or the problem that you've identified in this workshop, it's a process of getting to define what are you going to take away from it. And it might change over time too. So I had an experience that I wanted to share with you all about for showing how kind of the meaning I was giving to that experiences affected my thoughts, feelings, and actions. So about a year and a half ago, I was biking, and I bike a lot. I commute a lot for work, for fun, going to the gym. So I was biking downtown, and I got hit by a car. And yeah, it was not fun. I had to go to the hospital. There was nothing that was broken, but I was in the hospital for a good bit. Obviously, I was on like heavy pain meds after that. It was a very intense experience, and I like remembered it all happening with all that kind of thing. Didn't see the car coming. So that week, my sister's wedding was that weekend. I was the matron of honor. I know. Thank you. I love body language and facial expressions. So yeah, I feel very connected. Thank you. Yeah, not a good time, right? So the story I told myself when that happened was, oh, gotta keep going, right? And so I was able to go. I had a great time at the wedding. But then I kept telling myself that story. So I kept telling myself, oh, you gotta keep going. You know what? That wasn't a big enough deal to slow down. You have a lot going on. I did that comparison thing. Don't know if you can relate to that, of like, well, people have it a lot worse, so I didn't even have any broken bones. So, yeah. So because I was telling myself that this isn't a big deal, you should be able to keep going. Don't give yourself space to recover, right? Because those were the stories I was taking away from that experience. I didn't make time for all the things that I needed. So once I finally slowed down, I was able to get the help I needed both emotionally and physically from being through a trauma, which that experience was for me. And so once I slowed down, then I started going to physical therapy, going to a great counselor in town. There's lots of good counselors in town, by the way. And yeah, I was able to actually move through that experience, but by negating the pain that experience caused me, I was negating part of my story. So we can't create stories that don't honor the whole experience. We can't create stories that, I mean we do, right? But to move through in a way that helps us go through it towards healing, towards connection, towards just a sense of wholeness, we've got to incorporate that whole story. That includes the pain and the suffering, as well as the resilience, right? As well as the strength. There's enough space for both. We can have both those things, and they don't cancel each other out. So for our last part of your activity, I'm going to have you think about, and I'm going to put a quote up here for this. We're going to skip that one. Yeah, it's great. I want you to think about who has storytelling rights. So like I said, getting to those meanings, like that story I just told you was like the process of a year, right? So getting to the meaning and the story that you tell yourself is a process, not a single point. And I'm sure in another 5 years, the story of the bike accident for me is going to have a different meaning. So in that process, I want you to think about who has rights to decide, who has rights to shape the story you're telling yourself? Who has rights to influence the story you're telling yourself? So these can be people, This can be spiritual figures. This can be pets, right? It can be places or larger social constructs, certain religion, like could be a lot of different things. But who has the right to get to influence your story? Because without that reflection and awareness, we're often taking stories from a lot of other things and people and constructs that don't deserve to have that right. Like when I think about beauty as a woman, like most of my life I gave the right to define beauty for me to Hollywood, right? And Hollywood doesn't deserve that right for me. Like, right? Like, no. And I don't know if you've heard this too, we do this a lot where like someone we love will give us a compliment and we're like, get that off, right? But what if we were more intentional about who actually gets to say, wow, you look really nice today, versus, that's just one example. So write on your sheet of paper, who has storytelling rights in your life?
I deal with who has those rights in your life and who do you need to stretch out for?
Oh, yes. You can write that, yes. I love that idea. If you need to there's something powerful and externalizing and what you're doing, getting it out of your head and onto paper. This is a really powerful, deep process, by the way, so I appreciate your bravery and partaking in this. But there's something very powerful about putting it on paper and actually scratching it off for Terry, like Terry just said, of writing down who doesn't deserve storytelling rights and crossing that name off or that word off. Are finishing up that piece. I wanted to leave you with one last thought as you're on this journey. You're in this process, right, of trying to figure out how to shape your own story and who to allow the right to impact it. And that's to remember that there's room for compassion, right? That as we're trying to figure this all out, we're going to get it wrong at times. We're going to tell ourselves stories that aren't true. We're going to tell ourselves things that really don't fit for us. We also might hurt others in the process. Not might, we will, right? We will hurt others in the process. So we're not always going to get it right. And we're going to mess up, we're going to fail, even a lot, right? And we're all only human. So allowing in that compassion creates space to go on the journey. That we're all on this journey together. I love this picture. I don't know if you're familiar with the 6 blind men and the elephant, right? And narrative therapy would say the 6 people living with blindness and the elephant, right? Externalizing. So they only see a bit of what the elephant is, right? And they all have different pictures. We don't have the whole big picture. So we've got to give ourselves compassion because we'll know things later that we don't know now. And others deserve that same compassion too because they're also human and they don't know everything either. You don't know everything, we don't know everything, right? And so remembering to keep room for compassion. And kind of to take from that idea of mindfulness of being intentionally present with the moment you're in and allowing that compassion in. I thought we could all finish together with a little exercise that helps us to do that. So go ahead and get comfortable in your chair again. Maybe set your things down. Maybe if it feels more comfortable to stand, stand. If you feel better to lay your head down, that's cool too. So find a position that's going to offer you some space for comfort. Let yourself settle in. Maybe bring your gaze down, just to a soft gaze down in front of you perhaps, or if it feels safe, closing your eyes. Maybe starting to notice the flow of your breath. Maybe feel the inhale through your nose. Maybe exhaling out through the mouth. Coming into the present moment. Anchoring with the breath. Anchoring with the chair, the touch points. Knowing that you're grounded. You're able to be here in this moment. Now visualize a safe and serene place. It can be a mountain, beach, beautiful garden, some place from your life. It could be an imaginary place. Let this place be a refuge, be a place you can rest. Now visualize a wise and compassionate being in front of you. This can be a favorite teacher, a friend, a family member. This can be a spiritual figure. It can be a pet or other animal or a place that brings you comfort. Become aware of any pain you're holding in your body. Imagine what this being would say or do. What words would they offer? How would they comfort you? Listen deeply and see what arises. Allow yourself to receive the compassion and wisdom from this being. If your mind wanders, bring yourself back to this peaceful place and this compassionate being. Feel that you can take in some of their compassion and kindness. This is a place and a being you can go to whenever you need to. This is a resource for you to come back to. Keeping that wisdom with you as we start to come back into this room. Maybe wiggling the fingers and toes, maybe rolling the shoulders. Maybe shaking the neck a little bit or rolling the head out. Starting to blink the eyes open when you're ready. Maybe turning up the corners of your mouth if you're feeling some light, some positivity. Bring back into this moment. Well, that was all I have for you today. You all are absolutely amazing. As I said, it takes a lot of guts to do some of the really deep self-reflection work we did here today. So take care of yourself throughout this day. If you have any questions for me, let's see how we're doing. I think they'll be having you kind of start to network and move to the next point because we're at 11 o'clock now. I also have my card, so you can have my contact information. So I'll pass some of these out. But again, thank you so much for joining me today.